Hello again guys, welcome back to the channel. This is Comic Kid here again, and today we have an In Defense Of for Man of Steel 2013. Now this is gonna be the first in our DCEU ideos, and I'm hoping to get through this, BVS, Suicide Squad, and Justice League before the Snyder Cut comes out, but we'll see how it goes. Now, despite coming out in 2013, this is still one of the most talked about and controversial, disputed, whatever you want to call it, type of superhero movies in cinema. And I definitely think that says a lot about the film in general. Now, a lot of people might disagree with me on this, but I definitely think it's at least fair to say that the film is good art, and that even though not everyone may enjoy this film, it's still definitely got everyone talking. And say what you will about Zack Snyder, but I mean, people are still talking about Man of Steel and BVS despite it being several years since these movies hit theaters. And so I guess that's actually my first point in defense of the film, is that even though there's such a wide array of opinions on this movie, I mean, people are still talking about it. It's still relevant, as evidenced by a lot of the comments I see on anything, and people love to debate this movie along with BVS especially. So, as far as the common criticisms go for this, a lot of people think as though it kind of missed the mark on Superman in general. A lot of people feel as though it's too dark a representation of Superman, and you hear the argument that though Superman has been done dark in the past, it's almost never the main version of him that's done this dark. And so I definitely understand why people might have these criticisms towards the film, especially those who might have grown up during the Christopher Reeve era, but I also don't think it's too dark a film by any means. And I actually think the movie Brightburn does a great job of highlighting just how close this version of Superman came to being like a villain. Or I guess rather how easily it would be for a character like Superman in this situation, especially like just such a realistic take, could have ended up as the villain of his own story. And so just even though Brightburn came out, years after Man of Steel, I definitely think it, this still kind of helped Man of Steel's case. And he could have easily crossed the line at several points, especially in his adolescent years, and he didn't, just because the movie understands Superman, in my opinion. And then, of course, as far as the other criticisms go, you have the biggest one being the death of Jonathan Kent. In my opinion, most people don't dispute that Kevin Costner made for a great Jonathan Kent. It's mostly in that how he died that people have an issue with. And then, of course, you have the killing of Zod at the end of the film, but we'll touch on those points a little towards the end. Now, as far as the genuinely good things about this movie go, I mean, even the opening sequence on Krypton gets a lot of hate, but I honestly enjoyed that, and I do feel as though it's a necessary aspect for the film, at least in regards to General Zod's motivations. And so, spending a little bit of time on Krypton in the beginning not only helps establish your villain, but it actually makes Zod one of the best villains in a superhero movie to date, at least in my opinion. Now, the sequence has been criticized for being too long, but keep in mind this is also the first time we're seeing any sort of culture for Krypton in live action. And not only is that culture a welcome, just element of the movie, but, like I mentioned, it really hammers home Zod's motivations, and the changes they kind of made to Krypton really are put in place to reinforce Zod. Now, it's a common element in superhero movies that their villain just kind of struggles, especially with Marvel movies. They have a few great villains, but a lot of others really just kind of fall flat. And so I do think it was beneficial for the film to actually spend some time to establish Zod, especially early on. And then obviously the cast is amazing. Like, Amy Adams definitely doesn't look like a traditional Lois Lane, but I thought she carried the part very, very well. I love Amy Adams. I do think she's a phenomenal actress. And I really like how they did Lois Lane in this movie. She's not just there to be saved. You know, she still needs to be saved on occasion, but that's because, you know, she's Lois Lane. She's headstrong. She is not one to run away from a fight. She's gonna go head first into danger and all that. And so I really, really like how they did Lois. And you'll notice, like, it also didn't take her years and whatnot to find out Clark's secret. Like, no, she's smart enough to know. She's always been smart enough to know. And I thoroughly enjoyed that they didn't just beat around the bush as far as, like, Clark's secret identity, at least with Lois, was portrayed. And then, as I mentioned earlier, Kevin Costner just makes for a great Jonathan Kent. And despite the changes that they made from his character in the comics, you really get the sense that, yes, this is definitely a father who still cares about his son and is willing to do anything to protect him, despite the fact that he knows there's seldom he can do simply just in comparison to his son, but also very little he can do to protect him later in life as well. And so I absolutely love Kevin Costner in this movie. And then, of course, Cavill's just a perfect Superman. Like, most people, for whatever issues they may have with DC films, can all agree that Cavill is a great Superman. It's just a matter of who's helming his version of Superman that they have an issue with. But the man just radiates Superman and embodies him in just absolutely every way. And so I don't think anyone is gonna complain about Henry Cavill as Superman. And from what I can tell, it seems like everyone wants to see more of Henry Cavill's Superman as well. And then, of course, you have Michael Shannon as Zod, and, you know, also, as I mentioned earlier, Zod is easily one of the strongest superhero villains, not only in the comics and in the literal sense, but just in this movie as well. His motivations go beyond simply just hating the main character for whatever reason. Like, you know, oh, he was bred to preserve Krypton at all costs. We know Jor-El uploaded the Codex to Clark, and we know that Zod needs specifically the Codex in order to reestablish and save Krypton. And so this version of General Zod goes far beyond just, oh, I hate Superman, I want to kill him because I hated his dad, and there's much more depth to this version of Zod that's also given in such a short amount of time. That said, a lot of these details aren't quite as blatant, and I am inferring a lot of this just based on context clues, but I mean, you get the gist of it, especially if you really stop to think about it. So I do appreciate that about the film as well. Obviously, Hans Zimmer's score in this movie is phenomenal. Like, honestly, in my opinion, this is easily one of, if not his best cinematic scores of all time, especially like the Superman theme and What Are You Gonna Do When You're Not Saving the World? Songs like Flight. Like, it definitely rivals his work on the Dark Knight trilogy, at least in my opinion. And then during my rewatch, I've tried to keep track of certain plot holes that I noticed people point out throughout this movie, as far as like why Zod randomly wanted Lois to come with him as well. And she does have a line where she says they went into her mind as well, and it's like, okay, so he may not have known how, but they at least knew that Lois knew something about Clark in his life, and so it does make sense that they would want to, you know, probe her mind just to gather information on the enemy and stuff like that. And I've also heard people complain about like them needing to turn Superman's pod just to get the Codex key to go in. I did find that bit a little hokey, like it didn't quite need to be there in my opinion. So that is a pretty valid complaint that I found as well. Like, it just seemed kind of like a random problem that was a little too easy to solve, so there is that. Now, to get into the key complaints about this movie, and like just we're gonna really go at them in depth. We'll start with the movie being too dark, and then go to the death of Jonathan Kent, and then the killing of Zod. But As far as it being too dark, I would really disagree with this, especially for like a modern take on Superman, and like seeing a movie like BVS follow this up. I would not say that this is too dark at all. I definitely think it kind of hones in on the theme of Superman as a symbol of hope, especially going from this one to BVS and then Justice League. Like, Snyder really has the opportunity with the Snyder Cut to hammer home the theme that, like, yeah, sometimes hope struggles to find its way, but it's always gonna be there no matter what. And so I do think, had Snyder gotten to finish his like 5-part Superman arc that we know he had planned, I definitely think a lot more people might have been receptive to the idea, but we'll kind of have to see how that goes from this point on. But I don't think it's too dark. Superman has been dark plenty of times in the past, and the movie does pull a lot from storylines like Earth 1 and especially Superman Birthright. And so if you guys haven't read those, I would check them out. Both are great in my opinion. But I really don't think it's quote-unquote too dark. Could it have been a little lighter? Yeah, probably. Would I have been okay with it if it had been a little lighter? Yeah, probably. But I don't think this interpretation of Superman is enough to justify it as them like misunderstanding Superman in any ways. Now, as far as the death of Jonathan Kent goes, this is definitely one of the most like controversial moments of the film, and easily one of like the make or break type moments. And people are gonna disagree on this no matter what, but you have those who say like, no matter what, Superman would have saved his father and this, that, the other. And I do agree that this is the biggest change from the comics, because whenever Jonathan Kent dies in the comics, it's usually a heart attack, and the whole point is to emphasize that not even Superman can save everyone. And in the movie, it's simply just a matter of the world isn't ready. And we see this, the whole world isn't ready element kind of come back to haunt Clark, especially in BVS. And so I get why they felt they needed to kill Jonathan Kent off this way. Now, as far as my general opinion on this moment goes, I'm indifferent. Obviously, it's justified based on the story in BVS, but I do think people are overreacting a little bit when they say that like Clark effectively committed patricide. Like, I wouldn't quite agree with that. Do I agree that he probably would have saved his father, even though it's not what he wanted? Yeah, but at the same time, Jonathan Kent, at any given point, would be willing to die for his son, no matter what. And so I agree that if he thought the world wasn't ready, I do think Jonathan Kent would be willing to die to protect his son in this manner. And so I definitely understand why a lot of people had an issue with this scene, but I also don't understand why it's such a big deal. Could it have been done a little bit better? Probably, but it's not enough to break the movie at all, in my opinion, and people really seem to have an issue with this, and I'm not quite sure why. But I do feel as though Jonathan Kent would totally be willing to die for his son, especially if he believed the world wasn't ready, or that he wasn't ready to protect himself from the world, and so I get it. Now, as far as Superman killing General Zod goes, this one, I'm really not sure why people have such a big gripe about it. Superman has killed Zod in the comics before. I believe it's issue 22 of John Byrne's Superman. And even in the comics, it was exceptionally painful for Superman to do this, and you really get the sense of that at the end of Man of Steel too. Like, he did not enjoy doing that at all. And so I'm always a little confused that people who react to the film in this negative way also seem to be the ones who enjoy Christopher Reeve's Superman 2 a lot. And so I'm always a little confused by people who complain about this aspect of the movie, just because a lot of people who say they prefer the Christopher Reeve stuff seem to overlook the fact that he totally was fine killing Zod and everyone in Superman 2, and so that is something I just don't quite understand people complaining about. I think it's just people complaining about it. And I understand the argument that this was their opportunity to do better than that, but they still killed Zod in a quote-unquote better way than they did in Superman 2, and so I had no issues with it at all. And especially for a Superman who's been Superman for all of like 5 minutes, I think it makes sense for his character, and he's gonna make mistakes, and everyone who complains about all the destruction in the city, it's like he's been Superman for 5 minutes. He doesn't know how to fight. His only advantage is that he's been on Earth longer than Zod and them have. And so I don't get a lot of the complaints about the destruction or the killing of Zod. Like, I mean, I think it's just people trying to complain about the movie in whatever way they can. But that is about everything I can think of to say in defense of Man of Steel. Now, obviously, I'm not trying to say it's a perfect movie. It does have its hiccups and whatnot, but I do think it's one of the stronger superhero movies out there. And I think with time, especially, more and more people will kind of warm up to it and get a little more receptive to it. And I imagine it'll be held in at least a bit higher regard than it currently is. But only time will tell if I'm right. That said, it's been almost a decade since it came out, and people are still talking about it, but that's about everything I have for that. So let me know what you guys think down in the comments section below. Be sure to hit like and subscribe, and I will see y'all again real soon.